the one thing Putin fears more than war. Russia is not the most popular country in this world right now. In fact, it perhaps may be the most notorious one because of its belligerence, violation of international laws, and disregard for neighboring countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ironically, the Russian invasion on Ukraine has not been going well either. Despite that, Vladimir Putin is not really afraid that Russia will have to back off. He fears something else, the implosion of the Russian economy. So stay tuned as we discuss exactly what keeps Putin up at night, and let me drop you a hint. It's not Ukrainian soldiers, it's the way the Russian economy has been structured. But before we go any further, I would request you to subscribe to the channel. Thank you! Now, in order to understand the problems of today's Russia, we have to go back to the glory days of the Soviet Union. Back then, the Soviet Union had these remote mining towns located in the furthest of its reaches, somewhere in Siberia. Now, these areas were called as cities, which means that actual people lived there, despite the wild remoteness and extreme temperatures. Some of these mining towns started off as gulags, or forced prison camps, where enemies to the People's Revolution would be sent packing if they showed any signs of resistance against state ideology, or state officials for that matter. After Stalin's death, these gulags were converted to mines after investment of millions of rubles, and were later called as mining cities. For instance, the mining city of Norilsk has a population of 200,000, and here the only source of employment is mining nickel. There are other mining cities too, dedicated towards mining asbestos and coal among other minerals. As you can imagine, these places are one of the most toxic places in Russia, and yet people used to flock to cities like Norilsk. The question is why? The answer lies in the Soviet system of social welfare. In the Soviet system, you can retire as early as 55 years old, and in some cases even at an earlier age under a few conditions. These conditions included working under harsh conditions, such as working in a mine. This meant that after hard labor for a few years, you could potentially walk away with a good future. This meant an early retirement on a warm beach somewhere in Crimea, instead of hunting wild deer in Siberia for the rest of their lives. But this promise was good as long as the Soviet Union existed. So fast forward to 1991, and the dream of early retirement and good pension is taken away forever. Instead of earning their rightful payout, good Russian workers were looking at bankruptcies and layoffs now that the Russian economy was going through a series of liberalizations. The structural reform triggered the financial crisis of 1998, which further brought down the value of Russian pension by another 50%. This meant that the promise of social welfare was done away with. That was the state of Russia, in which Putin first rose to power. Putin, like a typical idealist, had a solution for the deteriorating social welfare system. He insisted that instead of relying on the overly complicated categories of benefits, the government should just dole out cash payments and let the people decide whatever they want to do with it. This seemed like a logical solution, but it did not sit well with the people. They had worked too hard to earn the right for a better future. And so, Putin faced a public outcry against overhauling the social retirement package. How did Putin respond? He simply announced that he will not change the pension system whatsoever. He recognized that changing something like this would make his rule extremely unpopular. So, he had to dangle some carrots in front of the Russian people. This meant that state-owned corporations, which were running at a loss, had to be kept around simply because pensions could not be taken away from the people. Jobs had to be given so that the social fabric remained intact. This ultimately resulted in an extremely bloated state bureaucracy. Imagine a whopping 32% of the population working for the state. The oil oligarchs have also used this trick. In order to win favors, they do not fire people, they keep them on their jobs. All this means that the state gives out jobs it cannot afford to keep people from falling into abject poverty. The ultimate goal is that Putin gets to have votes in his favor at the end of each election year. But this could not be maintained, and Putin knew it well. So he quietly increased the retirement age from 60 to 65 for men and from 55 to 63 for women. The public took notice, and his approval ratings tanked immediately. Even the annexation of Crimea could not bolster his rankings. So, his regime again lowered the retirement age from 63 to 60. Despite the drastic difference in the life expectancies for men and women in Russia, they were looking at a future where the ratio of old to young will continue to grow thanks to advances in technology and science. This means that the pension balance will tilt towards a large number of senior citizens. Now here's the problem. Russia is facing sanctions due to its invasion of Ukraine. Most countries have cut trade ties with it too. In the face of global economic strangulation, how will Russia continue to provide generous pension benefits to an overwhelmingly aging population? This is what keeps Putin up at night, and the real danger here is that this situation is not unique to Russia. In fact, it is growing to be a European problem too. Have you heard about the pension benefit riots raging on in France? Feel free to comment below and give this video a huge thumbs up if you found something of value.